Sweet. Okay, today we have on Facundo from Agora. Has quite an interesting background story. Obviously, we're in the heyday of the stablecoin mania right now, so no better person to bring on. I've known Facundo for a little while, and we're going to have him give us a little bit of background and, like some quite an interesting background, in fact. So welcome, and feel free to introduce yourself.
Yeah, glad to be on. I definitely think we're in stablecoin mania, but what I always say is like you're gonna get however sick you are if you're about stablecoins right now, it's gonna get a lot worse. Like a lot worse. So you better get ready for it. And then I probably have a weird background. So I was born in Argentina, then grew up in New York and Connecticut. My dad worked at JP Morgan over there, and then moved back to Argentina for like mid high school, basically. And then I followed a very unorthodox path. So I dropped out of a university that is not very sexy to drop out of. Like I dropped out of an econ degree, right? Which is not like, it's not very like Mark Zuckerberg, like dropping out of CS at like Stanford or Harvard to like, and you immediately go into YC. It's like very different. And I've been working for 6 months at this point. I'd always done a lot of internships and just like, part-time work at like, smaller mid-market PE shops or investment banks. I'd always really enjoyed that stuff. And I felt like I learned a lot more there than in college, actually. And so at the time I was working at this, small European VC and audit shop called Zokyo. Probably biggest claim to fame is, I think, it was the second check into Layer Zero. So very kind of heyday, like, it was like 2020. It was a very interesting time. Things were happening very quickly. And I was just seeing all these deals all the time. It was very, very fast paced, very, very quickly moving. And it was just much more interesting than anything that I was studying. And so I kind of immediately moved towards there. I worked there for a year. Then I was briefly I got poached to go work at WorldCoin briefly. It wasn't just a good fit on an organizational level, but still a lot of people there that I love. They're great guys. And then I was kind of thinking about what I wanted to go next. Probably going back to college was kind of on the table. There was a startup that I was looking at starting. And then the other thing is, at the time, it was kind of an interesting quirk. There was a lot of usage of stablecoins and crypto in Argentina, and there had always been, because of kind of the inflationary background of Argentina. But there was absolutely no crypto law at all. Like, it was a total vacuum. And you didn't have like this SEC that, had some vague rules about what is allowed and what isn't allowed, and then maybe some overstepping somewhere US. You just had nothing. There's a total vacuum. There's like very large companies that were publicly advertising, hey, come buy crypto here, the Lemons, the Repios, the Delos, the Satoshi Tangos of the world. There's huge thriving ecosystem here of different exchanges. And so I was like, wow, we probably should have a law. Like, it seems pretty bad that there's just no framework at all, right? I'm not in favor of maybe overregulation, but there should be some degree of rules to play by. And so I met up with this total genius lawyer, Stefan Galleback, and he actually wrote the first version of the crypto law for El Salvador back when this was a huge deal. El Salvador was kind of the only country that was moving at all in a positive direction with regards to these things. I do think it's very interesting how quickly things have changed in the past year, the past year, 2 years with regards to that stuff. And so I worked with him to create. We were looking at several South American countries, but specifically Argentina. I had like some connections in government and some political connections, et cetera. And so I started speaking to some of these connections about, hey, how can we create a crypto law? And working with Stefan, we created a first draft. Back in the time, it was actually a huge priority for crypto companies. A lot of crypto companies ring about, okay, if the US continues to become more anti-crypto, maybe actually we'd want to go house ourselves permanently offshore and permanently move offshore. Very different time. I think that has changed very quickly. And so we have this first draft, and I think, okay, in terms of next steps, first things I should do is make sure the industry's on board with it. I'd already talked personally to some people that I knew that were involved in the writing of it and such. but I also wanted to go and actually talk with companies. And so I knew some people at Tether from some of my previous roles. And so one of the first companies, the first like big company I went to go speak to that wasn't a personal friend was Tether. And it was very fun because they didn't quite offer me a job on the spot, but they kind of offered me a job on the spot. I did have, like a team home, and then I spoke with Paulo and Claudia and the rest of the team. Had quite a few interviews, but yeah, they kind of offered me a job on the spot, which is very interesting because, it's still like 100-person company. I was one of the first country managers they hired, and I was very young compared to all the other people they were looking at hiring at the time. I think I was like 10 years younger than like the average age for that kind of role that they were looking at. And since then, I've just kind of been super focused on stablecoins. I always remember thinking that stablecoins were very, very interesting and were going to change things a lot. I think that's a perspective you get living outside the US, where money doesn't work very simply. Like, it's very hard to move money. And you hear about, PayPal or Deal or Wise or whatever, it's solved money. And it's like, you actually use these products from Argentina, and it isn't a great experience. It doesn't work very well. The FX is always horrible. Like the typical, one place where I was nitpick is like these people who say like, there's no fees on the FX. It's like, yeah, but your FX sucks. Like the end user doesn't care, right? It's like when, I don't know, Robinhood's a great product, but like when Robinhood says, we have no fees, it's like, yeah, but I'm hitting your order books, right? And maybe your order books suck for some particular security or something. And so I just think being outside the US and it's hard for me to say early at Tether, probably in terms of, people outside of crypto, definitely early at Tether, but Tether's actually been around for a very long time, like over a decade at this point, right? I think it became interesting like in the past 4 years, I think, is when it really skyrocketed in terms of how interesting it was as a business and such, and people started being a lot more aware of it. But yeah, I definitely think being outside the US and being involved in stablecoins for very long has given me kind of a unique perspective. I think one of the things I harp on a lot is that if you work in crypto at all, you're in a low information environment. And then if you work in emerging markets, you're also in a low information environment. And so what I always say is, if you're at the intersection of both of those, you're in a no information environment where like you should actively assume that any information you're seeing is like actively trying to, psyop you or convince you of something that is not necessarily true. And I think this is, like, I talk about this a lot with a lot of VCs that I speak to, a lot of guys I respect. I think there's probably maximum like 1 million crypto users. And I think that's probably pretty optimistic, actually. I think probably there's like less, probably like 100,000, like a high 6 figures maybe. And so I think for some types of crypto products, that is very bearish. But for some types of crypto products, that is actually like incredibly bullish. Like for stablecoins, I think that's massively bullish. And so, yeah, that's maybe a super quick background on me, how I came to work at Tether. And then very recently I joined Agora. So I've known Nick personally for over a year and just kind of always really respected, the way he thinks about the space. I think he has a very clear thesis for where things are going to go. He reached out to me, I think, some point very early this year with like a tentative, hey, at some point, I'm probably going to hire someone in Latin America. I've hired someone in Asia. I've hired someone in Europe. We want to build an A team. What are your thoughts? We had some long conversations. I know Rob and a lot of the guys at Dragonfly very well, so they kind of spoke very highly of Nick. And so, yeah, now I've joined. I'm very glad to have joined. It's been a very fun 3 months from now. It's been very hectic. I hit the ground very, very quickly. But it's been really, really great. Yeah.
Okay. Going back for a second. So the initial sort of intro to Tether was because you were like this young kid writing some thought pieces with well-known lawyers. They hired you. What was your day to day, to the extent that you could talk about it, obviously, like, but what were you doing? Like, what was your role for Tether in Argentina? Like, what does that look like in practice?
Yeah. So I'd say the majority of what you did, and like you say, there's some things I can talk about, some things I can't talk about. I saw a great relationship with the team and definitely want to take care of that. What I would say is there's a lot of working with channel partners. So one of the interesting things when you work on stablecoins is that you have very little information about your actual consumers, because generally the information about your consumers is gated behind either a exchange, a VASP. I always use the legal term, so a VASP, or a wallet, or now you see these cropping up all over the place, like these stablecoin neobanks. They're basically wallets with like a credit card attached, maybe like an ACH virtual account in the US or a virtual account in Europe. Those are growing insanely quickly. So I'd say the day-to-day included a lot of talking to channel partners and seeing how can we help channel partners grow, finding new channel partners. A lot of what I did specifically, which is probably very unique to me as opposed to other country managers, I worked a lot on legislation. I spoke a lot with the central bank. I spoke a lot with our equivalent of here, we have the equivalent of the SEC and the CTFC are kind of mashed up. And we have the privilege. We have a fantastic regulator there who's really, really great. And so I spoke a lot with legislators in different countries. I'd say I spent like a third of my time with channel partners, maybe 20% of my time with regulators, 20% of my time speaking with like up and coming startups, a lot of which basically turned into these stablecoin neobanks. They kind of started, you had some of them that started from the wallet side and moved over to the banking side, and some of them that started more from like the neobanking side and moved over to running like their core infrastructure on wallets. And then probably the rest of the time I spent speaking to traditional financial institutions and trying to get them comfortable, which is like a very long and arduous sales cycle. Because a lot of these, like if you work in banking, your business kind of exists at the behest of the government, right? And so there's a lot of things where you need like not even a tacit, you can go ahead. You need like an explicit, yeah, you can do this. And so a lot of times they're very excited about the product, but there's some limitation in terms of the legislation or compliance or, hey, we're a GSIB. So actually like to onboard us, you don't just need to convince like my chief compliance officer in Argentina or in Uruguay or whatever. Like, hey, you actually need to convince the guy in New York. And then that becomes very complicated and very long. So that was basically what the day-to-day was. A lot of it is speaking to people who do the distribution for your product, right? Because you don't do the distribution. So I think that's something also very unique about stablecoins, particularly like kind of, app agnostic stablecoins, where you have very little information about your users. Very little information about your users.
Yeah, this is like a bit of a side note, but I'm just kind of interested. I spent a little bit of time in Argentina, probably about 10 years ago, and you are obviously probably extremely familiar with this. There's like this dollar blue, right? Like the blue market where...
Yeah, the blue market.
Yeah, so like at the time, it's like really quite fascinating. You could go and exchange money at like at the airport or something, you get some rate, but then you go to these like little... It wasn't that sketchy for what it's worth. It sounds like all sketch, but it's really just people who kind of set up these kiosks like in a hallway, and you could get like double the rate sometimes because there was such demand for dollars in Argentina. Tell me, has that been supplanted very much by, like the long run is we're all sitting here, like obviously this is going to be supplanted by stablecoins, but what does that look like now? Is that still like a thriving market?
Yeah. So those are interesting. So we call them cuevas here, which just means like cave in Spanish. And they have these everywhere, right? So these exist from Argentina all the way to Mexico. I will say they're like a lot bigger in Argentina because of kind of some historical. Argentina at some point had like pretty intense capital controls. Right now, you see them cropping up a lot in Bolivia. Bolivia's growing a lot because Bolivia has some degree of capital controls. Venezuela's huge as well. I was, there's like there's three types of economies. There's developing, developed in Argentina, right? We're very weird. We had at one point like 20 different prices for the dollar, right? It's like the only country where you show up and you're like, hey, like, what's the exchange rate in the local currency? It's like, well, it depends. Like, who are you, right?
Yeah.
And it's because it depends what category of, for tourists, you're always going to fall into the same one. But basically, the dollar blue was like the gray market dollar. You were restricted from buying it if you were, if you interacted, like if you're an importer, for example, you could access a cheaper dollar to import things. And so they didn't also want you to be able to access the more expensive dollar because you could basically just use it as what we call like a financial bicycle, right? It's just kind of a financial perpetual motion machine. And it's at the taxpayer's like expense.
Arbitrage.
Right? Yeah. So Argentina's had capital controls for a long time. Right now it's getting a lot better, like significantly better. And yeah, all of these cuevas use USDT. All of them use Tether. Like all of them will accept stablecoins through and through, which I think is very kind of interesting to look at and reason about. And they'll usually quote it, I want to say like 20 bips above the dollar.
Okay.
So, and when I say the dollar for them, that usually means the dollar blue, which the dollar blue means basically physical cash dollars in Argentina. So one of the fun stats about Argentina is there's actually more greenbacks per capita in Argentina than in the US.
I believe that.
There's more physical US dollars in Argentina than in the US. And it's like very common because in living memory, in 2001, the banks failed. In 2001, you had convertibility where you had 1-to-1 on the dollar to peso. So it's very reminiscent of some of like the, rebasing stablecoins and stuff. You had the 1-to-1, and then they actually didn't have enough dollars. And so all these banks failed. There's like amazing photos. You can look them up. Yeah, it was very interesting. So a lot of people, what they do is like, it's colloquially called, you're leaving your money under your colchon, which just means like under your mattress. Like you literally have, and so people will literally have, it won't literally be under their mattress, but it'll be like, like a painting safe or something. And they will literally have like $50,000 cash or $100,000 cash, which is definitely very different from the US. So yeah, the Cuevas are huge here. I have a fun story. I've mentioned this to you before, but I took Rob Attic and Paul Kremsky to go check out and see a Cueva once, which is very funny. I was telling Paul, hey, this guy does your same job, which is funny. Paul's great. He's a good guy. So it's always funny to see that. And I think it's a very different experience for some of these like VCs and some of these people who are very used to, hey, like I'm working primarily with speculators, right? It's primarily speculation on that side, right? If you're at Cumberland or if you're at Dragonfly, you're investing in all these long tail things. And sometimes I suspect it feels very divorced from reality. And I think that's one of the very interesting things about Argentina. And hopefully, a lot of your viewers can come down to DevCon, which is going to be super soon. They should definitely hit me up or whatever. But one of the fun things is doing that and seeing like, oh, people actually use stablecoins. And I've met people from like C-level positions at huge banks in all of LATAM, but particularly in Argentina, that have used stablecoins. And I was like, oh, you've used like, oh, that's crazy. Like I never would have expected. And you speak with like an American banker or whatever, you have to actually explain it from like the very beginning through to the very end. Whereas these guys are like, yeah, I actually used them to move like mid 6 figures, like back in 2020 or something. And so that's always like very interesting is like they understand the product and people find it very compelling. Yeah.
Well, yeah. Going off this point, I mean, obviously the constant kind of narrative is like, of course, in the United States, you guys have Cash App, you have Venmo, you don't understand the value proposition for the third world. Okay, I say third world. Okay, I'll say Argentina here, and you can decide what world this is. Right? It's definitely. I wouldn't call obviously all of Argentina is not third world, but talk to me like at being on the ground. How many people are using stable coins on a daily basis? Does everybody have a wallet? How many merchants are accepting them? Are they primarily these savings vehicles like you're talking about replacing the safes behind the paintings? Like give me like a practical kind of like explanation of what you see on the ground and sell it to me such that, when I hear every VC and thought leader talking about how everybody, you don't get it. It's like, okay, fine. I'll talk to somebody who gets it. Like give it to me straight. At least from the Argentina perspective.
So there's a lot of savings. I think also one thing Americans don't understand is it's very common. Like one of the more interesting stories, I've read some books about this, but one of the more interesting stories that happened is like the Swiss financial system got like totally decimated by the Americans. But the Americans actually don't share data with a lot of countries on who has an account in the US. And so it's very common in many Latin American and Asian countries that you actually have an account in the US. That maybe has like a lot of money, like I think in the case of Argentina, it's very high numbers. A lot of these numbers are like, could be on or off by an order of magnitude because you're trying to track something that doesn't want to be tracked. And I'm always very skeptical when people are like, oh, this is how many stablecoin users there are, or this is how much fraud there is, or anything like that. I'm very skeptical about those numbers, although I think that's just kind of the way I am also is I'm very skeptical about these things that you can actually measure them with any degree of accuracy. But there is a lot of money that lives there, where it is not actually very efficient for it to be in the United States, but what they want is they want it to be offshore. And so stables are a much, much, much more efficient vehicle. I would say practically everyone here in Argentina knows what a stablecoin is. Sometimes they know it as, I remember sometimes I couldn't introduce myself as working as Tether. I had to introduce myself as working at Tether because people would call it Tether. They wouldn't pronounce because the H's are silent in Spanish. It was Tether. Or you'll say like tetas instead of saying like USDTs, they'll say tetas. They'll call them tetas. Or they'll just call it dollar crypto. It'll be like Band-Aid, where it's just like, oh yeah, that's just like the dollar crypto. And like what they actually mean is USDT. I would say a very high percentage of people, I would say anyone who has intimately worked with money movement 100% knows about stablecoins, and probably like half of those people have used stablecoins for money movement. The problem is a lot of people don't intimately interface with this. Like it's abstracted. It's like your private wealth manager, right? It's like someone who, has a high net worth individual, invests in a bunch of things, but it's actually their wealth manager who's doing all the operations for them. They're not actually moving the money themselves. It's someone else moving the money for them. And so in terms of the actual flows, it's very, very, very large for sure. It's like unfathomably when the plasma guy is like spam trillions, it is literally trillions. It is just massive, massive, massive sums of money. And then there's just so many inefficiencies, right? Like right now, the best dollar yields in Argentina, and these are subsidized, by the way, and this is not like available in retail banking, is like 3%, in terms of like money market funds. The best thing is 3%, right? With stablecoin yield farming, you can like easily hit 10 to 12% to higher, right? And you're principal protected, quote unquote. You obviously have the asterisk of like smart contract risk and et cetera. But there's a lot of ways you can protect against those things. And so it's just the opportunities are huge because the opportunity is literally just upend banking. I would say certainly outside the United States for sure.
Let me take a moment to talk to you about Ellipsis Labs, a team I've known for a while building some of the most interesting products in the space. The Ellipsis team is one of the few that I can consistently point to and say, these guys really know what they're doing. They're backed by Paradigm, Electric Capital, and Han Ventures. The founders, Eugene and Jerry, have experience at Citadel, Jane Street, and the Solana core team. Since launching their order book DEX, Phoenix, they've done over $80 billion in trading volume by making on-chain order books competitive with centralized exchanges. They are also the team behind Gavel and SolFi. I would consider them the foremost experts in crypto market microstructure. The best part is Ellipsis is hiring for New York-based engineers. Work with a small, focused team who are results-driven, collaborative, and use a modern stack. If you're an engineer who wants to work on infrastructure that's already proving itself in the market, go to ellipsislabs.xyz. Okay, now back to the show. Yeah. Okay, let's move on like a little bit to now Agora. First of all, give us a pitch on Agora in general. Like, where does it position itself? And then, we can afterwards talk about what you do, but like explain Agora.
Yeah, of course. So I'd say Agora, I would always start from like, okay, you already have a stablecoin. Like a stablecoin is a great product. And I would say what differentiates us from others, from the USDCs, USDTs of the world. So number one, I think branding is very important. As someone who sat there and I literally pitched Tether to like GSIPs and such, the branding is so important. Like it is so relevant. Hey, these guys, have an office in the tri-state area and they can meet you. And their website looks a certain way and they'll interact with you a certain way, et cetera. Number one, obviously our, connections in some ways to Van Eck. We do the custody of all our T-bills with State Street. These are like very familiar names. We have attestations. You can go to our website. We have the developer docs there with like attestations every month for, hey, this is how much is sitting in D-bills. This is like the average date of our T-bills, et cetera. So that's kind of number one is like, I would say there's like a branding thing and something in terms of how we work with companies where we're very upfront. And I've heard a lot of complaints about people that I've worked with like Circle where they're like, hey, it's kind of not really a pleasure doing business with these guys. Like, I don't like doing business with guys. They have like a ton of employees and I'm not sure why it's so difficult to do business with them. I probably have like a very extreme selection bias there, of course, having worked together for a long time and like outside of the US. So no shade to the Circle guys. I'm sure they're great. And then with Tether, I would just say like Tether's like a very extremely small team and Tether just Tether like negotiates with you from this extreme position of power of like, I don't care. Like, yeah, use my product, don't use my product. Like I don't, at the end of the day, like for most apps, even if you're huge, right? Like you're huge in crypto world, you have $1 billion in deposits or whatever. It's like to Tether, that's like, yeah, man, like if you use this, great. If you don't, whatever. Yeah. Whereas I think we have like a very clear model where we want digital dollars and stable coins to work for the companies that work with us and to work for the users. And so we try to make things as easy as possible. We have some interesting things. We have some liquidity we do against other stable coins that makes people really love us, where we kind of always have best in class liquidity against any FX, like anywhere in the world, which is huge. This is also like one thing people don't realize is like FX matters so much for stablecoins. Pretty good if you're actually trying to build something closer to emerging markets, closer to like what I would call a real use case. That's super incredibly important. That's something I spend a lot of time thinking about is FX and how do we get better FX. I would say obviously on the commercial side, we're significantly better than these companies. Circle, if you're a Binance or someone, will kind of begrudgingly come to you and share some of their revenue, or if you're a Coinbase, Tether, basically no cases. We're happy, we'll find a way to share the underlying economics. We'll find a way to make it worth your while. And Nick always says one of our first slogans is like digital dollars should be a public good. And so this should be something that returns to companies, returns to individuals that are holding them, et cetera. There's a bunch of regulatory restraints there. We always work as best as we can. Obviously right now, you have like the Genius Bill is signed. It's not in law yet. This is something that's always funny. There's a lot of stablecoin issuing companies that will say like, oh, we're Genius compliant. It's like, you're not, no one's Genius compliant right now because it's not an actual thing. So what I'd say is like, if it came out tomorrow, we would be compliant. We follow kind of all those rule sets, et cetera. That's also a thing that I think is different between us and particularly like Tether in this case is like, we are very by the book, et cetera. And because our target is to work with banks, right? Our target is to say, hey, we see this world where stablecoins are probably going to upend all of banking, entirely. And so if you are a bank or you are a fintech, you are a Revolut or you are a new bank or you are a Mercado Libre or you are whoever, or you are a Santander, you are a BBVA, you are a Chase, you're a Bank of America, your business model is going to be completely upended in 10 years. I'm actually extremely certain about this. And there should be someone at your company who is thinking about, hey, how do we work with stablecoins? And we have basically positioned our company, we positioned Agora in a way such that we are absolutely the best in class partner. So we're credibly neutral. That is also something that works for like apps and chains, right? We don't have our own chain. That's why chains love working with us. Apps love working with us. We're not going to launch, I won't mention any specifics, but Tether and Circle, both, like I've known for a very long time, both of these companies are basically competing with every other company on every other vertical. And so it's very difficult to say, I love Paulo. He's already really rich. He's doing very well for himself. Jeremy is great as well. He's doing very well for himself. And so kind of the pitch is, hey, these stablecoins should be working for you. You should be getting something on the commercials underlying. So that's a little bit what we work on at Agora and how we think about the product is, hey, how can we best serve? Our primary thing is we're a stablecoin issuer. We're working on kind of a set of secondary, I don't know if products is the right way to talk about it, maybe infrastructure. We have a lot of things that are very interesting there, but it's all in service of the primary thing, which is, hey, let's create a great suite for anyone to launch either their own white labeled stablecoin or to work with AUSD in a way that's compliant. And this is also one of the things is a lot of companies come in looking for a white label, and then they actually realize, oh, I didn't want a white label. What I wanted is a stablecoin that is like actively not competing with me in some other part of their business against my business, and that is returning the economics back to me as well.
Yeah. Okay. So like you started off, I asked what Agora did, and then it was like, it took you a little while, but I think you got there. But I just wanted to follow up. So like, just very, very simply put, Agora's positioned itself such that you are essentially middleware, credibly neutral. Like you don't have any, you're not you're chain agnostic, as they say, and you are going to institutions and saying, hey, we can help you create a stablecoin. Like this is effectively the pitch.
Yes, this is the pitch. But what I would say is like there are two types of customers. So one is an institution that's, a bank or a fintech, more, Web 2 or whatever you want to call it, TradFi. I prefer TradFi. Those people are someone we serve. And then we also serve a lot of, I would say, customers that are like more crypto native. This is like a wallet, or this is a lending borrowing market, or this is a chain that says, hey, hold on, I have $10 billion of Tether sitting on my chain or $10 billion of Circle sitting on my chain, and I'm actually not making any money on that. And actually, that money is basically going to finally compete with me. And so I would say those are like kind of the two big buckets of customers we look at.
But it's okay. So that makes sense. So would you say that, okay, so like Tether does not give anything back. And like you said, they have enough power such that they can just say, we don't want to do business with you. There's this interesting piece, I don't know if you read it, by Nick Carter, who's long, like, one of the kind of like stablecoin gurus. So typically I read his stuff. He is kind of making the claim that the stablecoin market is no longer going to be sort of this duopoly. And I think that Agora is like a prime example of, competition coming in and saying, look, like Tether, you've had this monopoly for so long. And indeed, they built some like massive network effects and truly like a name brand there. Do you see like the Tether monopoly cabal being disintermediated? Do you see the future being such that there's going to be all of these competing stablecoins and returning yield to somebody else that's not just purely Tether, is going to be sort of like the future? I mean, I assume in many ways Agora is built on that premise, so that makes sense, but I'm kind of curious, like, your thoughts.
Yeah. So I would say the Tether team was like very brilliant, and they saw a lot of these things ahead of time. I certainly don't think that the actual amount of Tether that is emitted is going to go down. I think it's going to keep going up. I think what's going to happen is you will have a lot of crypto native companies, and you already have this, right? A lot of crypto native companies looking at Tether, looking at Circle, looking at their stablecoins and saying, hey, it is not that difficult to imagine a stablecoin that better serves me. And that's where, hey, AUSD comes in or a white label comes in. And then you have the institutions on the other side where that's where you have like trillions of dollars in deposits. And that is where the numbers actually become astronomically large. And when I think about, hey, what is compelling to me about Agora? What is compelling to me about this move, et cetera? It is bringing like those flows and those deposits, that stock of dollars basically onto stablecoins and onto rails that are more efficient and better. Yeah, I would definitely say what is different about Tether, and here Nick's great. He puts out some really great research. I have maybe some specific points I disagree with him sometimes in terms of like the minutiae of the data. It's really kind of nitpicky. But like I remember one of the stablecoin reports, like Argentina was listed, and it was like 80% of transactions in Argentina are done against Circle. And just like that is just not true. I would say anywhere below Mexico, 90%, if not more than 90% of transactions are done between Tether and the local currency.
Yeah, this has always been my assumption as well. Like,
and like this report, and to be fair, he like very clearly labels his data, and it's like, yeah, there are limitations with the data, etc. So he's always very honest, and like the pieces he puts out are great, super well researched, like very concise, look very good. But I have some qualms with the data there. I just don't. I don't believe this stuff, basically, right? It's just like I look at this stuff and sometimes like I just look at it from like 1,000 miles away and I'm just like, yeah, I don't believe this. Like it just doesn't pass a smell test for me. And I think what Tether has really built that is like very great is over time they've managed to build a last mile market that is super, super competitive. And that is very difficult to supplant.
Yeah.
That last mile, right? That like you're in Uganda and you see a little sticker that says like USDT accepted here. Like that is incredibly difficult to compete with, and very impressively well done.
Yeah, I mean,
so I don't think the amount of sorry.
Quickly on that note, like I guess what would you say to the notion that at least from a consumer, like this last mile, sort of like that part of the market specifically, has Tether reached kind of escape velocity in that sense?
Yeah, I think in that sense, Tether has kind of reached escape velocity in the same way that like Western Union is still a product, right? Like,
I know.
Western Union probably, I would not be surprised if Western Union's like revenues go up every quarter still, right? As like someone who's trying to build the cutting edge, it's like not super impressive or compelling, but like these companies will keep growing. And I certainly think Tether is like very far away from not growing. Again, they're like a fantastic, super brilliant company. I just think that the position they are in is not so favorable for companies that are working with them. And a lot of the companies that are working with them are starting to think about their business model, right? As you're starting to mature, it's also like a thing where a lot of these companies got funded in like 2020, 2022, 2021. And so by now they have to start thinking about how they're turning a profit. And so that means in a lot of cases, like, hey, either you increase the fees or, hey, hold on, we have like this risk-free rate. We have, I don't know, $1 billion in stables. It's like actually changed a lot. If you have $10 billion in stables on your chain, that is basically $400 million you're throwing into the trash every year that you don't work with Agora, right? Like it's a lot of money. And in some of these chains cases, that is like their entire treasury. And that's a per annum flow, right? So it's like incredibly significant and large. Yeah.
You're going to work with all these partners. Let's say you 5 years from now, you have, we won't call them necessarily white labeled, but let's say like stable coins from all of these banks. You have Goldman and JP Morgan and Santander and all of these banks around the world. What do you think about this idea that everyone's going to have their own stablecoin that's going to be a massive pain to consolidate? And is Goldman going to honor their $1 the same way they honor some, Barclays $1? And when we start, hopping borders, how do you view this kind of notion of like, okay, we've now refragmented. Maybe they're on more efficient rails, but we have some like similar kind of annoyances.
Yeah, I think in some ways this is definitely going to happen. I think there's going to be a lot of middleware companies that abstract this away and then have relations with a lot of those issuers. I think a lot of those people are going to be using like Agora on the back end. And so although like it'll be a different bucket, it'll be the same blend of assets. And so it'll be very easy. I think it's a very interesting world, right? It's like no one wants to get basically liquidated by inflation anymore. And so to a lot of people, the risk-free rate becomes like, hey, this is like the minimum I need to be getting, or like a little bit under the risk-free rate, right? After like some intermediaries. And so I think that's going to be kind of a very interesting world. In like a lot of ways, the economist in me is like, thinks that's super interesting, right? Because it's a world where like you stop having different fiscal and monetary policy and it all just becomes the same, because if your whole money supply becomes stable and that's all sitting in T-bills, what happens then? Like, does the Fed start saying actually... Yeah, it's like all the dollars are staked. It's exactly like that. It's like, what if we all start staking and then we all start using, and then like it's not really rehypothecation.
But yeah, go on.
Yeah, well, it's not so much like it's very clear where the yield comes from in this case, because it's like government spending and government borrowing. That's very clear to me. What is not clear and what I think is super interesting is also like what's going to happen to these banks. And one of the things I think about a lot, I think the banks. And I think a lot of the C-level at large banks, and particularly like some of these regional banks, they won't say this, but I think their actions show their revealed preferences show very clearly that this is the way they think about their company. They no longer think of themselves as a business. They think of themselves as a walking balance sheet that they can scrape a few bips off of the lend and the borrow difference. And I think banks will move in this direction. Like if I was starting a stablecoin neobank right now, I would be thinking a lot about kind of 2-3 years from now, I'm going to acquire a lot of young consumers. Like this is something I say a lot too. Is like my grandfather probably gets like a significantly worse deal from his bank than I do, right? He has like a farm, and so he has like some financial instruments tied up with a farm, this and that. And the other. He probably gets like a significantly worse like native yield on whatever he's holding in his bank, like significantly worse UX. They probably hit him with a bunch of hidden fees, et cetera. He gets less cash back, et cetera. But like he's going to stay at that institution, right? He's 80 years old. He's not going to.
Yeah.
He's not like shopping. Like I do it for fun. I'm like a psychopath. I like will try out the newest stablecoin neobank that comes out every week. I have my like Apple Wallet. Looks like a disaster. There's just like a million cards there. What I'll say is, I think the problem is these stablecoin neobanks don't have the balance sheet to go out and lend. And one thing that I think is super interesting and where there isn't a lot of differentiation yet is, hey, I actually have like data from very young, probably disproportionately high and earning users. So like these are some of the most compelling people to give loans to, and they're like coming into their 30s and 40s. They probably want to buy a house, which is like the primary financial instrument or product that most people interact with these things for. And it's like, okay, now actually what, like you're going to become a credit origination place. And like maybe a lot of the way you make your money is you go talk to some bank, you say, hey, like you guys have $100 billion you want to ship into mortgages. I have a portfolio of, 100,000 users. Maybe 1% of those people will want a mortgage every year. And that's a lot of money. So I think about that a lot too. Yeah, I think some of these companies will issue stablecoins. I don't think there will be this crazy fragmentation because there's going to be a lot of people. One of the things that I think is very sacred, in my opinion, is very sacred is like when a user sends $1, they should always see $1. It's such a horrible feeling. It's such a horrible, like you should, as a stablecoin in your bank, you should do everything in your power to make, like lose money on it. I don't care. It's so important that when a user sends $1 in, they should see $1 in that. It's actually like the most important thing ever. And it's crazy because actually like if you see 99 cents, that's actually much lower than like the hidden fees that a lot of banks charge, right? Because a lot of banks will like hit you with a random, like it'll be labeled some like ridiculous, I don't know, like invoicing fees or like compliance, like just some arcane name that like your eyes literally, your eyes gloss over it. Right? It's designed in a lab. Like they have some PhD from MIT who's like in a lab picking the most boring name possible that your eyes like literally just gloss over it, right? And it's like $100. And it's like, how often are you sending your bank money where if you're losing like one bit on, whatever, and you're sending like $10,000 to your bank, that's the same as like a hidden $100 fee. But one of them feels way worse. One of them just feels so painful. And so hopefully, we live in a world where you don't have these hidden fees, and stablecoins create like a much better way where these banks can make money and the users get much better yield, et cetera. I think there's a lot of UX things there that are still important, are still getting worked out, like cross-chain abstraction as well, et cetera.
Yeah, that was kind of going to be the follow-up. Agora like prides itself, I suppose, as being, very much chain agnostic, but there's going to be some rails that are more used than others in the future. Right now, obviously, with Tether, they have a big presence on Tron. We'll see if this changes, but how are you thinking about that? Maybe with relation to Agora, but maybe not. Just like from your perspective, where do you see most of these stables ending up?
I think stable chains will be a thing. I think the thing is like there's a lot of chains that kind of already were sort of like a lot of the ETH-L2s were basically stable chains.
Yeah,
they just didn't call themselves stable chains. But they were, and a lot of them like are ostensibly basically stable chains, or they look a lot like stable chains in a lot of ways. I think one of the things that's going to be interesting is how do these, like if you rebate all gas fees, for example, on a certain stablecoin or on stablecoins or whatever, and then you have a lot of blocks, like very fast blocks, very, short block times, you have all these transactions. It's like, okay, then how are you actually monetizing? And then maybe the answer is like, oh, we're actually not monetizing, like the revenue meta isn't a thing. I kind of disagree with that, at least in the like long term. I think in the media, I think that can sustain itself a lot longer than people think. But I think any team that is actually competent should be thinking about like, okay, what does this look like 10 years from now or 20 years from now? And I think, 10 or 20 years from now, that's not sustainable. And so you need to be finding other ways to monetize. And so that can be lending, borrowing, that can be credit. That can be, oh, I'm actually going to own the front end and I'm going to charge fees on the front end. Like, oh, I'm going to launch my own. But then that puts you in a complicated spot of like, okay, if I'm launching a front end, whether that's a wallet, whether that's a stablecoin neobank, whether that's I'm a bank that wants to live on stablecoin rails, like why would I work with you if you're going to have your own solution, right? Like you're kind of back at the like king making problem. I think probably the most interesting one there long term is like finding some way to eat a percentage of the lending borrowing markets. And this is something like I've advocated for a very long time when I speak to a lot of the VCs. You should not necessarily king make lending borrowing market or something. But when I think about like, what is a blockchain? One of the things that was insane to me with regards to Ethereum, and like they've built a fantastic product. They have way too many haters, et cetera, because, it's easy to hate on them, et cetera. But like one thing that I do think is pretty crazy is I think there's a lot of things that Ethereum created this like tradition that you would kind of outsource this. And I think it's kind of crazy that they did this. Like it is insane to me that there is not a default. I'll do an analogy like Costco, right? Like you walk into Costco and they have their water brand. It's not the only water brand. They don't give it like crazy advantages, but they have a water brand that is like their water brand, because the core value of going to Costco is like you can buy something to drink there. And so they're like, hey, like we will make sure you at least have like Costco water, right? Like there will at least be something. And so in the same way, I think there's like a couple core use cases, which is like lending, borrowing, swapping, and sending are like core use cases of blockchain, where if you can't do those three things, it's like, what is the blockchain good for if you can't do those three things? So I think those are core. And I think teams should think really deeply about potentially creating like loss leader products there, where it's not, hey, like this is the enshrined one that you go to, but hey, this is like a very good experience. Maybe there's not the premium. It doesn't have like all the fancy, this isn't like the Evian or the Fiji water or whatever, but this is like the Costco water. Like it's water, right? It does the basic stuff.
Yeah. I think there was like some kind of discussion points around this. Like even Uniswap was Vitalik so I think Vitalik actually like seeded in some capacity.
He seeded
Uniswap.
The idea for Uniswap.
Yeah. But I think he also put money into it like at the beginning. I'm almost positive. But
yeah, I'm almost sure. Yeah.
So, but like, regardless, when he first talked about AMMs, he was talking about an enshrined version, because I think he saw the writing on the wall, like what you're talking about, which is that maybe there should be some enshrined looking apps. And I don't know, I mean, this hasn't really played out as, expected, but now we do see this much more. Like the most recent and obvious example, which, sorry for your loss, was the Hyperliquid, stablecoin market. I don't know. Do you have any thoughts on that, by the way?
I think Hyperliquid was fun. I think there's a lot of like behind the scenes stuff on Hyperliquid that I can't get into.
Yeah, of course.
I don't think it's not some crazy secret.
No, everyone knows.
Most people that work in the industry will know what I'm talking about. Hyperliquid was like great for us. Like you have no idea how much inbound we got after Hyperliquid, because there's so many I won't say any name and names because I don't want to embarrass them. But there's all these people that I've been bothering for like years and years and been like it doesn't seem like you're thinking deeply about stablecoins, and it seems like they're a core part of your use case, and you're not thinking about them because it's not like where quote unquote the meta is right now. And then like, since I joined Agora, I was like talking to and bothering a lot of people like, hey, you should think about, how can Agora work with your chain? How can Agora work with your protocol? How can Agora work with, whatever? And there was just no interest until the Hyperliquid thing. The Hyperliquid thing made it huge because it just became like the thing that people talked about. This is also somewhere where like, I believe in a lot of maybe like unorthodox thing. I think economists like fetishize this idea of the market. And it's like very often the market is just like 200 guys and like we all know each other and we all like hang out at the same parties and we all know the same, like we're all in the same mix of, we always talk like the same mix of like, 100 group chats that are like permutations that are slightly different of the same 50 people. And so I think that's one of the ways that markets can be like very rational, is because you think about like this idea of like disinterested, totally independent, and that's just not real. That doesn't exist in any market. That's not a thing. That like lives on blackboards and basically nowhere else. And so, Hyperliquid was great for us. That was like one of the best things ever, because so many companies started like, oh, wow, like this is actually like this is a great deal. And this is like maybe equivalent to like our entire revenue, or like multiple times. Like if I extrapolate this deal to our chain, hey, this would be like our number one source of revenue. This would completely change our valuation, what we look like, how much money we make. Have you ever talked about DATs in this context? In the context of this? This is like maybe a spin on everyone was talking about DATs. I kept thinking, sorry for bringing DATs back. Yeah. I don't think DATs are very interesting. I think I was like very sick about hearing about them on every podcast, but I think one of the places where they are interesting and no one is thinking about them is like the way I think about DATs is DATs are like a coordinated mechanism for holders for like a token, right? It's like, oh, we all invested in Avalanche, or we all invested in, Story, or we all invested in Hyper, whatever we invested in, or Solana, we all invested in this like X years ago. And in some ways, they're kind of a vehicle for all of these people who are very bought into this to say, hey, we're actually all going to like lock it up again, right? And we're all going to coordinate. None of us are going to sell it. We're all going to keep holding it. And like, hopefully some people come from the stock market and buy some more of this and it keeps going up. That would be great. And, whoever's running it gets some management fees, et cetera, gets to skim a little bit off the top. The lending borrowing stuff is fun. That's obviously better than like just holding tokens. Again, with like the very big asterisk of smart contract risk, because principal risk is like a huge problem that people don't think about a lot of times. One of the places where I think DATs are very interesting that no one has like discussed publicly is there are these huge vehicles of coordinated capital. And so they can pressure a protocol. Like if you say you're a chain and you have this huge DAT that has like, I don't know, 20% of all your tokens, or like all your big players are bought into that vehicle. You guys can go and be like, hey, we want to farm this protocol, but we will only farm this protocol if you actually use AUSD. So we're seeing the economics on the stablecoins. And then it's like, to the protocol, this also solves a liquidity problem, because you have like one big customer that is asking you, hey, I want AUSD, or I want a better stablecoin. And then this can become like a fee switch where maybe, the proceeds from this are buying back the token, or like eventually they will buy back the token, maybe not in the short term. I also think there's some weird dynamics around like token buybacks in crypto where we've talked about this before. Like it's kind of like that meme of like the midwit, right? Where it's like at the very right end, you have like, actually crypto is like a growth business. And so we all think the space is going to like multiply by whatever order of magnitude in the coming years. And so buybacks don't make sense. Buybacks are something like Coca-Cola does, right? Like a mature company does. Like an Apple in the first 10 years it's not economically optimal for these companies to do buybacks. It doesn't make, because you should think that your rate of return of capital is going to be significantly higher than the rest of the market. You're in a growth industry. That said, it is interesting that in crypto, you have these cases where you have like dual class equity structures. I won't mention any specifics, but like you have a lot of like things that look like dual class equities, or, you know, where it's not clear where the value accrual is going to land. And so token buybacks are like the midwit option, where they're actually great because they demonstrate that like the team does actually think that like in the long term, there is some connection between the revenue and the actual like these tokens. So that's interesting thing. But yeah, I think the DATs, I think no one has thought about the DATs that way. And that's like one of the places where it's actually...
Yeah, this is like much more sophisticated and like forward thinking. I think most people are just like, oh, nice. Like this is
a vehicle
like
for
massive,
retail. Like hopefully retail buys this. Yeah.
A massive...
Hopefully some dentist in Oklahoma buys a lot of this.
One of Doug's friends. Yeah, it's like, oh, that's a good one. Okay, so but my thing is like with the buybacks, and I completely agree. It is a growth industry, and I wholeheartedly agree that like buybacks are, you know, if you
they're
can't,
theoretically suboptimal, right?
Oh, for
theoretically,
sure. No, certainly
a buyback is very suboptimal.
I think the thing like with hype, I've said this before now, and I think a lot of people can recognize it's like with hype, it was just so powerful that there was a protocol willing to show that it could make money. Like there was a business model there. We charge fees for people to trade perps, and we use those fees to buy it back. And it was like, for, you know, this just goes to show the nascency and kind of unsophistication of crypto. It was so empowering to people like, whoa, like this thing can make money. So
yeah,
it was mind boggling because nobody had thought that anything could make money. So like in one hand, I wholeheartedly agree. And like, I would say the vast majority of protocols should not look to buybacks. It's just like, oh my God, there's proof of potential profit. And that's what like really kickstarted that flywheel.
Well, Amazon did this a lot. This is something like profit is kind of similar to this in like backing. You look at like '01 and like early days of like the .com, you know, boom. Amazon did this where Amazon would lose money, and like it's economically optimal to lose money.
They still don't pay a dividend, you know?
Yeah. But one of the things that they did is they actually brought themselves to break even, and then they would lose money again. And then they would bring themselves back to break even to prove to investors, hey, we can actually break even on this. But we think that economic, and so that's like going back to the midwit and being like, hey, I can do a token buyback. Like I can do it. Exactly. I won't just rip you off forever. You know, all the revenue is not going to go to some random entity that is in like Cayman, or you don't understand. It's very difficult to understand. Like there is a mechanism for the token to make money. The token will make money. That said, I understand that today that is not the best way. So I'll demonstrate to you, I can do this. I can turn this on, and I will turn this on. My interests are aligned with you. I'm holding the token. I'm not holding some equity in some crazy, you know, whatever. But it is actually economically optimal for me to lose money. It is actually economically optimal for me to leave the fee switch off. Like that is very optimal for me. And yeah, I think that's one of the things. I think all the DAT companies should absolutely come and talk to someone like Agora and say, hey, how can I pressure, like, how can I talk to these lending borrowing markets? How can I talk to the biggest stablecoin banks? How can I talk to every app that holds a lot of float of stablecoins or holds a lot of stables or, you know, interacts a lot with stables? Say, hey, I'm a coordinated pool of capital. I can change the economics for your business. You have a liquidity problem where, like, if each of the individual actors that's in my DAT individually came to you and said, hey, we'd love to, you know, like see how we can integrate Agora, maybe it's not so interesting because like you start fragmenting liquidity and we have a lot of solutions for that. I won't go into the specifics, but there's a lot of ways you can solve for that, and that becomes not a concern basically. But it's so much easier when it's like, hey, we have this much of the, you know, network token that represents like a massive sum. We would instantly rocket you to the top of like the leaderboards. The one thing we need is we need this. Like we need this one thing. We need you to use a stablecoin that returns value to the ecosystem. We need you to use this white label. And so that's something that I think is actually interesting about DATs. And like, yeah, you're probably right. I mean, I'd like to think some of these guys are super smart and they have thought about it. And a lot of them like have thought about it, but aren't implementing it yet.
Kyle is doing like hoping to do something like this with his Solana. I know that he's trying to be more active. Let's say I don't know if it's exactly the same thing, but he's
I think there's a lot of cases where thinking about this, which is like also similar to stuff like Trump is doing with like where it's like, okay, the U.S. government will become like a customer of yours, but like I want 5% equity or something. Those are also interesting. I think that's also like an interesting thing you can do. That's like a very real thing you can do. The stablecoin thing is so nice because it's just a win-win. You're like, the protocol doesn't lose. It's literally just a win-win, right? And so that's what's so compelling about it. And it's often a win-win, not just on the commercials, but like other things that we do where it's the same thing. Like you have these first generation stablecoins, and again, they're great. I super respect these teams, but there's a lot of ways in which the experience, either for the customer or for the brands in the middle or whatever, is not an optimal. It's not a great experience. And beyond the better commercials we have, beyond the like better technology, beyond the branding, and we custody it this way, it's super secure. It's also just like a lot of our focus is spent on, we want to make it a pleasure to work with us. And it is like, I will hold your team's hand down the road as like they go to do this stuff, which is very different from what I hear from the experience of working with other stablecoin issuers. It's just like, this is an unpleasant experience.
Hey, Will here with Blockspace Media. Did you know that we have individual feeds for all our shows? If you're watching the Mining Pod, Bitcoin Season 2, or the Court Show, be sure to check out the individual feeds. You can find them on your podcast player of choice, whether that be Spotify, Apple, YouTube, etc. Just type in Blockspace Media and you'll find all our shows pop up, or just type in the individual show name like the Mining Pod or Bitcoin Season 2. Be sure to hit that subscribe and give us a 5-star rating so we can continue to bring you the best content in Bitcoin.
That checks out. Okay, I have one last question. Is there anything you wanted to talk about? Feel free.
You should definitely come to Buenos Aires. I know it's going to be Buenos Aires. You should definitely go try to Cueva, actually see what it's like. I've had some pretty crazy experiences. When I worked at Tether, this may be a fun one. I'll say one quick anecdote. I had a missionary come up to me, like this guy who did missions down in Africa, come up to me. I won't say where, but he came up to me and actually got on his knees in front of me and thanked me for working at Tether, because he was like, during the pandemic, I had no way of getting money. And he was like, I actually didn't have money for food, and stablecoins got me money for food. And that was an insane, I talk to this guy still. That was an insane experience to me. Yeah. I think that stuff really like brings you down to earth. It's like, okay, that's actually like, that's crazy. Because we spent all day like talking about, like capital efficiency and whatever. And so it was a very enlightening experience to have like some guy be like, oh, like you're the reason I was able to like buy food for like a year. That was pretty insane. Yeah.
Okay. The last question was, how do you feel about Milei? Give us like a little, give us an update on the Argentine economy. Like, is such an insane character. Is he a Bitcoiner, first of all? Yeah, he gives us slight vibes, Bitcoin, right?
He's definitely like Bitcoin aligned in the way that like Trump is, or like, let's put it this way.
Yeah.
Definitely the people that don't like him are very anti-Bitcoin, right?
Okay,
for sure. Sense. I think Argentina's very complicated. Look, I spoke with people in the past admin. I spoke with people in this admin. My view is always like, hey, I'm here to provide a business, and like, I need to think in terms of decades. And so I need to be like politically very agnostic. I think what is interesting about Milei in Argentina, I think liberalism, the flavor of liberalism that Milei brings in Argentina, which is different from what you mean when you usually say liberalism in the US, is something he's managed to really change the demographics, where he has young people voting for like fiscal conservatism. And I think that's super interesting, because historically that's not the way it works at all. Yeah. That's a complete inversion. I think Milei has a lot of great people. You know, anyone who looks this up will know this. My father works at the central bank.
Okay.
And so
in Argentina,
I assume you knew that. I think we talked about this one or twice. Maybe it on our right. So
I knew your dad was an economist, but I didn't know that he was at the central bank. Okay, interesting.
So he's at the central bank, which is very funny, because then when I like meet my dad for dinner, My dad was not a bit. So I actually pitched my dad on Bitcoin. He worked his whole career at JP Morgan. He did like emerging markets at JP Morgan. He was their chief economist for LATAM.
I thought he was like, I thought he was a professor. I thought he was like some famous professor.
No. My uncle's like a well-known professor. He's at MIT.
That's okay. That's what I'm thinking of. That's what I thought your dad was. Anyways,
maybe that's what you're thinking of. My grandfather also a professor, but yeah.
Okay.
I'm like kind of the black sheep as far as I dropped out. for a little while, that was like very uncomfortable. Now I think I'm
You're
like
gonna be the one remembered.
Now it's not as big a deal, but like for a little while, I was kind of the black sheep of the family for that. I think the funny thing with my dad, I pitched my dad like quite aggressively on Bitcoin in 2015. And it's not like you should buy like one Bitcoin. This was like, hey, we should like half port into Bitcoin. Like, it was like quite an aggressive pitch. It did not work. Otherwise, maybe there would be like some sick beach behind me, or like an insane yacht or something. I always think you should pitch your dad like one or two things. And if it works great, you should never pitch him anything again. So you can always hold it over him. Like the value of that is like infinite, right? You can't buy that. He's become much more heterodox about these types of things, I would say, in the past few years. I also think it's just like, I think the case for Bitcoin is like much more obvious now after you had like the bout of inflation in 22, you have like a more complex geopolitical world, et cetera. I think at some point central banks will probably start. I think at some point, like you look at the holders of gold or you look at the holders of T-bills, it's like, hey, there's actually like a very concentrated group of people. Like going back to what I said earlier about like markets are actually like 200 people. Like the people who can make these calls all over the world are actually like 200 people or 300 people. And it's like, what happens? Like we saw it happen with El Salvador. I think El Salvador is a very weird case where it didn't cause like a preference cascade in a way that you might have expected because of this weird case. But it's like, what happens if a G20, like what happens tomorrow if like France, like just to throw a name out there, like a G8 or G10 economy is like, yeah, actually, we just bought like $10 billion of Bitcoin. Like, I actually think the price might go crazy. And so this is why I have a lot of people who are like, yeah, this feels toppy right here. Like, I think we're going to retest 117. It's like, dude, what if tomorrow the UK just says, yeah, we actually just bought like $100 billion worth of Bitcoin. Like, yeah, I actually think the price might go astronomical, like overnight.
I completely agree and I think that this is something that like, it's so annoying because you hear this from these insane Bitcoiners who are just like, absolutely in this like cult mindset, and it's annoying because I think they are correct in that they constantly say this, the game theory, right? But I think you're spot on that if one large nation state announces a massive
one like established buy, quote unquote normal nation state does it really changes everything like overnight.
100%, yeah, 100% agree.
It's so literally like in the span of a week, I can imagine a 10x. And like when you talk about a 10x in Bitcoin, this is like $1 trillion. This is $1 trillion asset, right? Yeah, but I think you could actually have like a 10 trillion inflow into Bitcoin in the span of like a month or something. You could have insane. I always joked Tether's like a very Bitcoiner company, and I think certainly WorldCoin that I was at, or like some of these other companies were like more Ethereum. I always joke like I was the most Bitcoiner guy at some of these like non-Bitcoiner companies. I was probably like the least Bitcoiner guy at for what it's worth. Like certainly, I'm also one of the only people who like works in this industry. I don't look at the prices at all. I don't know if you've noticed that some of the group chats we're in, like I will not like if someone will mention to me about the price, I'm like, oh, what? Like Bitcoin's like, whoa, sick, man, like epic. Yeah. And it's like maybe it's literally like a 30% move from the last time I looked at the price. I don't. Like Bitcoin to me is one of those things where like, if you're trading Bitcoin, you have like, if you're a full-time trader and this is what you do, great. If you're not a full-time trader and you are like thinking about the price, I actually think like you should probably like reduce your Bitcoin port to like 50% and then just sit there and like not think about it. You should probably like think about some of the lending borrowing markets for Bitcoin. I think that's super interesting right now. I also like whenever you can get like a VC subsidized like interest rate, you should probably jump at that in general. Again, with the really big asterisk of smart contract risk, you should always be like very, very careful about that. But there's a huge thing there. Yeah, maybe that's what I'll leave it on. I definitely think you should absolutely hold like some small amount of Bitcoin. I do think it still has like a exponentiality to it, just because the Lindy effect, it's the first one, etc. there's just so many things for Bitcoin that I think make it super compelling. And then like there's just the generational trade as well, right? Like boomers, I just think like the most interesting and most obvious trade of the next 10 years that no one has priced is like the gold, like short gold on Bitcoin. It's like the most obvious trade of all time, I think.
Yeah.
And in the short term, will you have like painful blips like this past year or whatever? For sure. But like who is buying, like the median buyer of gold is like my grandfather. You know, I hope my grandfather gets to see great grandchildren, you know, et cetera. Like I'm working on it. But like at some point, you know, like ashes to ashes, dust onto dust. And like, you know, what am I going to do with my money? I'm not going to buy as much gold as him for sure. And like the median person in my generation is not going to buy as much gold. So I'm very long-term long Bitcoin. I'm very long-term long, like coordinated capital that looks at stablecoins deeply. And the other thing I'm very long is like non-vertically integrated companies. I think one of the interesting things about crypto is like it allows for non-vertically integrated companies to compete in a way that wasn't previously possible. Where if you look at like historically, most companies are very vertically integrated, particularly like financial companies.
Yeah.
Like the same company that does your banking will do your credit card and will do your like your mortgage and will do your thing. And I think one of the interesting things is that I think that's something we enable super hard, right? Also by being incredibly neutral, by saying, hey, we're not launching a chain, we're not launching this or that or whatever. And I think that's a huge value point we have. But yeah, I don't know if you have any other questions. It was great to be on.
No, this has been fantastic. We also got to cover like a bunch. I thought it was really good. We got to hop around a lot.
Yeah,
so.
I hope it was not just stablecoins.
No,
I always try
great.
to keep it a little more generic and general.